Hi, Science in Action Seminar folks. I would like to introduce to you one of my kind of old students. Well, not that old, but a student from a while ago. This is Roger Krupetsky, and I kind of remember him because he did a really great project for me, and I think he's always wanted to be a dentist. And so when he was working with me, he actually developed a process of using kind of PCR to do an analysis of basically tooth caries right inside of there and looking at the different bacteria that were in the mouth. And so I'm really excited to let him tell you his story of what he did after he left here at Skyline College and what he needed to do in order to get into dental school. So Roger, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Dr. Cap, for that intro. I don't think what I did was that impressive. I just read a lot of papers, saw what they did, and tried to recreate it in lab. But hey, if it sounds good, it sounds good. I'll take it. I'm really happy to be here. What Dr. Cap didn't mention is that we've actually been trying to get me on here for a little under a year now, I think. But like the scheduling has just never worked out with applications and then everything going on right now. So yeah, quick intro. Like Dr. Cap said, I'm Roger. I went to Skyline College from winter, I think, of 2013 and until spring of 2016. So I spent about 3.5 years there. I did some research in the biotech lab. I took my classes. Like my whole thing, it's a story. Like I did not start well. I ended up transferring, blah, blah, blah. Success story, gone to dental school. And you guys are basically here to figure out or listen to how I did that. I don't know if anyone here is interested in dentistry or if you're pre-med or pre-PA or anything like that. I'm sure you are because, in the STEM field, it's so common. So feel free to ask me questions. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, but if you have any burning questions during my presentation, I know the chat is being monitored. And so those will be, and I'll be checking in on it every now and then too. So those will be there for me to answer and I'll try to do my best by it. I want to preface saying that, I am a dental student right now. I'm at UCSF. I'm a D1, meaning it's my first year. We just started back in October. And so a lot of my information will be a little more dental focused, but I also tried to make it applicable to other health professions. For example, we as dentists take the DAT, the dental aptitude test. I think that's it. I don't know what the A stands for actually. But then there's also like the MCAT for medical students. And I'm going to try to gear my information to kind of like a general application process rather than dentistry specifically. But I will be talking about dentistry. And so let me just see if I can share my screen. I have a bit of a presentation for you guys. Yeah, visible? Can someone, Dr. Cap, can you give me a thumbs up? Perfect. So this is, basically my story, how I got into dental school from Skyline College through UC Davis. I ended up doing a post-bac program, and then I applied to schools. For those of you who don't know, a post-bac program is almost kind of like a continued undergrad, but it's usually structured. So some people opt to take like a 5th year at a 4-year college. Some people opt to move back home and either cheaper or for a different sort of structure, do a post-bac program. For me, I opted to do a post-bac program because I didn't feel like I was going to achieve what I wanted to achieve doing a 5th year at Davis. Doing a post-bac program, I could also save money by living at home and commuting instead of having to also pay rent in Davis. And also the post-bac program I did was on the semester system, not the quarter system. And for me, I'm not the type of person to really be able to like cram and succeed. Like I really need to understand and learn the material. And so on a semester system, I knew that I would have more time to do that, which is why I did that. But we'll get to all that. So without further ado, hey, I'm Roger. If you're reading this, I got into dental school, woohoo. I stole the slide from a presentation about half a year ago. But it still tracks. Like I'm so happy to be here. I think that, it took me about 5-6 years to get here. And so finally achieving this is just such a good feeling. I almost lost motivation to even finish school because I'm just like, man, this is something I've been working towards for so long. What's next? A bit of background. Oh, I don't know if you're seeing this. Apparently the full screen presentation mode did not translate my edits or my editing well. So it's a little clumped. Sorry about that. But basically I went to Skyline from 2013 to 2016. I did not start off well. I'm going to be honest with you. Like my first semester, and we'll get to it because I have a slide on it. Like I dropped a bunch of classes. Like I think my GPA for the first time for the first like year I was in Skyline was a sub 3. Like I started off with like a 2.5 and just slowly crawled my way up. And I had no idea what I wanted to do. But this is kind of some of the extracurriculars I did. So about my second year, actually while I was in Dr. Cap's class, just by chance, I ended up shadowing a dentist. And I was kind of at a point where I already decided I wanted to do STEM, but I knew I didn't want to do med school. I knew I didn't want to do nursing. I knew I wasn't interested in pharmacy. I never even really thought about dentistry, right? It just was lumped into healthcare, something I wasn't interested in. But I ended up shadowing my first dentist, absolutely fell in love with it, realized it's so much more of a people profession than I thought it was. You know, it's not just drilling teeth. People trust their dentist with so much. Like the first dentist I ever shadowed, she was great. Like if she knew someone was coming in who was a talker, she'd schedule an extra half hour so they could gossip and catch up on family and like, oh, like how are your kids and grandkids sort of thing. You know, she saw people for generations. Like I literally handled patient charts where it's like the grandmother, the mother, and the grandchildren were all patients of hers at the same time. And I just really love that personally. Like I never saw healthcare as something so personal and just such a different interface compared to what you expect from like a doctor or a nurse. You know, you get to work, it's basically just working with your hands all day and talking to people all day. You know, like yes, you're a doctor. Yes, you prescribe medicine. Yes, you deal with life-threatening situations. All of that still holds, but it's a much different approach than, you know, working at a hospital or working at a general clinic. And I really liked it. And, you know, I didn't really have anything else going for me at the time. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I thought, hey, dentistry is pretty cool. I'll keep exploring it. And so I shadowed this first dentist. I put in about 100 hours over maybe 4-5 months. You know, I'd go in maybe once or twice a week for like a half day and just slowly built it up. During my time at Skyline, I also shadowed a second dentist just to see how a different office worked. It worked pretty much the same, which I would later learn is not the case all the time. I just ended up shadowing 2 dentists who were very similar in their approaches to the profession. When I was at Skyline, I also did about a year of independent research under Dr. Cap. That's what he was talking about with the PCR thing. It actually started off as my independent study project for Bio 230, I believe, the second one. Yeah, Bio 230. And I was really fortunate actually because I had a classmate who was a registered dental hygienist. And so when we had to pick partners and groups and everything, and I had this idea for a project where I was like, oh, like I kind of want to do something dental related. Like I wonder if I can track cavities or caries as we call them. And she found out about that. And her name was Brenda, by the way, Brenda Barrientos. I know she's probably not in here, but I owe a lot to her. She's really helped me a lot on this path, actually, which is networking matters. See, like I met a classmate that ended up working out for me great. She hooked me up with like some volunteering gig down the line too. Point being, she knew what she was talking about. I didn't, but I knew that this was the project I wanted to do. And so we did it. We created a PowerPoint. We did the whole research thing. We collected saliva samples from classmates. We ran PCR, which let me tell you was a lot to learn. I was basically learning off of basically what Dr. Cap was teaching me, and then textbooks and lab guides that I found in the back of the bio classroom. And yeah, so I did research. I presented at the first ever independent, I don't know if it's the first actually. No, it's not the first. I presented at the Independent Research Symposium, helped arrange the Independent Research Symposium because I don't know if you guys know how that whole thing works in the background, but back when I was doing it, there was just like 5 of us trying to arrange all the different departments to present their posters and to get students to put forward work. The whole time I was in Skyline, I was a private tutor. That's how I paid my way through, which thankfully, you know, community college is pretty affordable. So it was doable doing that. I tutored a lot of like high school students and college students in like STEM, English, writing, etc. And I think one of the most formative things for me was actually while I was a college student at Skyline, I attended the UC Davis pre-health conference, which for those of you who don't know is just a giant conference that UC Davis holds every year with, you know, dozens, if not hundreds of health profession schools attending and holding booths and seminars and speeches and all this sort of stuff where you can network and just talk about anything you want really. And for me, that was the first time that I kind of realized that dentistry was something I could do, even with my low GPA, even with my, in my opinion, poor scientific skills and knowledge. Like I didn't really have much confidence in myself, because I think that medical school, dental school, all this is really hyped up to be this just insanely hard thing that you need to be brilliant to get into. But going to the pre-health conference, I talked to people from different schools, and they're like, oh yeah, I got in with like a 3.4, or like, oh yeah, I know someone got in with like a 2.9, but they had this like amazing like extracurricular activity, or this or that, or this or that. And I kind of realized that, it's not just about the numbers, it's about the holistic application. And so I decided, hey, I'm going to keep doing this. And so knowing that, like, now I had a goal, now I had some experience under my belt, I decided, like, okay, I'm done with all my GEs, I'm done with all my prereqs, which, by the way, I cannot recommend enough. I did all my prereqs at Skyline instead of waiting until UC Davis to do it, which basically meant that I didn't have to deal with like the insane curves and hyper competitive nature and the really hard classes at UC Davis. That being said, I did not do well in my prereqs. I have a lot of C's and a lot of B's. But if I'm sure that if I did those at Davis, it would be a lot worse than that. So yeah, I transferred to Davis, had pretty much everything completed, just had to do my upper division courses. And let me backtrack a little. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get to all of this. This is just all my extracurricular stuff. I was like the head of a dental clinic. I was the president of the Oral Health Society. We taught kids how to do, how to clean their teeth, brush, floss, everything about it. I was basically very, very active in extracurriculars. And I went to a lot of like one-off events. Like I volunteered at CDA Cares, which was a couple times a year. The CDA, which is the California Dental Association, it puts together this massive, massive weekend clinic where we see thousands of patients over the course of like 2 or 3 days. And we do everything, and it's all free, and people line up for days to get in. And so yeah, these were my final stats after Skyline and UC Davis. I had a 3.18 cumulative GPA, which is not great to get into like a health profession school. It's like good enough to apply, but don't get your hopes up. My science GPA was below a 3.0. It was a 2.96. Not great. And my DAT, I didn't even take it. The DAT, as I mentioned, was kind of like the aptitude test to get into dental school. So this was what I started off with. As you can see, I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but if you can, my first semester at Skyline was not great. I dropped 2 classes. I got a B, I think, or was it a B minus? It was a B. Sorry, I'm moving my screen. I'm moving you guys around so I can see my own screen. I got a B. Started off with a 3.0 technically, but look at those W's on my transcript, right? Like anyone would tell you that's not a good look. I retook pre-calculus over the summer, got an A by some miracle. And then yeah, like this next year, I basically just spent doing okay. Like honestly, kind of mediocre. Had a lot of B's, C's, got A's, and like the few things that I was good at, which was like, composition, like writing essays. I know I can talk. That's one of my few skills. And what I kind of realized in this year was that even though like STEM was difficult, like in that first semester, I dropped Chem 1, I dropped pre-calculus, like I was not doing well. And this was just translated from being a poor student in high school, honestly. But what I realized that even though STEM is difficult, it was kind of the only thing that interested me. I took some business class, I took an econ class, I took music, psychology, all these things. And you could see my grades, they're B's and C's, but they're not B's and C's because it was necessarily really difficult. I just was not motivated at all to study. It was the same problem I had in the first semester, but instead of actually taking courses I was interested in, I was having the same problems in courses I wasn't interested in. So how the hell was I supposed to, get myself to focus and buckle down and learn good habits when I didn't even want to be learning the things that I was taking? So I realized it had to be STEM or bust. And I don't show it here because after this, it's just all like mostly B's. But I ended up taking STEM classes again. It took me 2 tries to pass Chem 1, took me 2 tries to pass Chem 2, dropped it the first time, both times. So I don't have any F's or D's on my record, but still, both times I retook it. Straight C's through organic chemistry. I think I had like an A minus and a B plus in Dr. Cap's 215 and 230 courses. Pretty average across the board, nothing crazy, but I did manage to transfer. And so as I was talking earlier, started poorly, took a year to explore some options. I decided on STEM, which, pros and cons to that one. Discovered dentistry, which I talked about a bit on the earlier slide, and something that I've been pursuing since then. And then I decided to transfer. So I got my IGETC done, which for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's basically a guaranteed transfer to a school of your choice, more or less. I think I think that's the tag program, but you need IGETC to complete it. And I took advantage of that. I did all my prereqs, like I mentioned, and I pursued a lot of my interests. I did a lot of research with Dr. Cap. I was interested in a lot of different aspects of STEM, and so I helped set up the biotech lab. I think, or no, I don't think, I know, like I helped with Dr. Cap runs like a summer camp. I wouldn't call it a camp. It's not really a camp. It's a course, like a 2 or 3 week course for high school students where they come in and learn how a biotech lab operates. I helped with that. I just kind of pursued a lot of different things in the field. And part of it was building up my resume because I knew that my grades were not great and I needed any edge I could get. But part of it was also because, I wanted to make sure that the path I was pursuing was actually the path I wanted to do, right? It's such a huge commitment, both in terms of time, money, etc. Like, what if I just wanted to do dentistry because it was the first thing that fell in my lap, and not necessarily because it's something I wanted to do, or because people told me I should do it, which is not a good reason to pursue a career that you're going to be stuck in for 30 plus years. So these are my stats at the very end of being at Skyline. I had a 3.23 GPA, 98 credits, which they all transferred in terms of grades, but the way the transfer system works from a community college to a 4-year is they can only take a maximum of a certain number of units so that you don't hit the unit cap while you're there. And so I transferred technically with enough units to be a senior, but they transferred me in as like a lower ranking junior just so I can fit everything in. Moving forward, got to Davis. I already knew my grades were terrible, and I not that I thought I would do amazing, but I kind of thought that I wouldn't improve it significantly in my time there. I really just wanted to improve a little bit. I knew I wasn't going to be getting 4.0s. I knew myself, I'm not that good of a student. And so I knew that in order to get a good, strong application for dental school, I needed to supplement it with anything I could. I got really, really lucky, and I applied and got selected for something known as the Willow Clinic, which is it's a free clinic in Sacramento that's UCD Medical Center affiliated, where every weekend it's a pop-up clinic of the Salvation Army, and they provide free medical services to the homeless and to residents of the Salvation Army. Really, really great mission. Really love it. It's not just medical. It's also, they do legal clinic for people trying to get divorces or childcare settlements. They help you set yourself up for food stamps. They do optometry a few times a year. They really do anything and everything for the community. And I really, really stand by it. The reason I chose Willow Clinic instead of one of the other affiliated clinics at UC Davis is twofold. First of all, they were the only one with a established dental clinic, as in they had one that was consistent and I could actually work for. It would happen once a month. And so that's actually what I was hired for. I was hired for the dental clinic, which meant that I was a general volunteer for the regular clinic. I did my medical shifts and all this stuff. I did scribing. I helped with the code drive and all the fundraising we did. But my main job was the dental clinic, which actually after a year, I ended up taking over and becoming head of the dental clinic during my senior year at UC Davis. And there my job transitioned. I was still shadowing and everything, but suddenly I was also dealing with the logistics of, making sure the dentists would get there, making sure we had all the supplies, making sure that we're doing outreach correctly, making sure we're hiring correctly, all these different things that I think really helped round me out because I got to experience responsibility, I guess. I was no longer a grunt. I wasn't, I was no longer a grunt. I was actually in charge of making sure that this happened every single month, and more than every single month. One of the things that I was working on was trying to get a second dentist on board so we could do these clinics twice a month instead of once a month. One of the things I worked on was recruiting members so that we actually had enough staff to help one dentist every single time. There was a lot to it, and I put a lot of work into it during that time, and I'm really happy I did. Another extracurricular I did was the Oral Health Society. I was president of that. It was a dying club at UC Davis. Actually, the year that I got there, all the members left. So it was just me and one other person. We said, well, we can't let it die. Let's revive it a little bit. And we did. In 1 year, we turned it around. Me and my co-president, Farine, she and I, we hired members, we set up schools, we did interviews, we created lesson plans and training modules and all this sort of stuff. And we revived the club, and it was great. We went to elementary schools, we went to YMCAs, we went to Girl Scout troops, anywhere and anything that would have us, we went to talk to them. And the final thing I did was tutors for inmates. This was mostly just trying to appease my social responsibility side of things. It wasn't related to dentistry at all, but it was something I was really interested in. I'm not going to go on a spiel on it here, but the inmates in this country are treated awfully, and there's so little resources for them. And it's really just an unjust system, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people, but there's kind of like no way to improve it from where we stand right now. It's going to take a lot of legislation, a lot of talks. But my job was basically teaching inmates and kids in juvie to help them get either like their GED or their high school diploma, whichever one was coming up. Real quick, I want to talk about this. This was my first quarter at UC Davis. Again, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but it was my first quarter at UC Davis. I got 2 C minuses in my only like real STEM classes. I thought I was going to fail both, and the curve brought me up to C minus. I don't think I've ever been like at a lower point in my career where I was just like, what the hell am I doing? Like, why did I transfer to this university? Like, how do I think that I'm going to get into dental school? But at that point, it was kind of like, oh, well, move on, move forward. You know, like if this keeps happening, then I'll really think about something, but this could be a fluke, you know, transitioning to the quarter system, transitioning from community college to a UC. It's a lot. And so, yeah, I kept going, and I graduated UC Davis without a great GPA, and I did a postbac program. So my postbac program was PHEP, which stands for pre-health or professional health. You know what? Don't quote me on that. I don't remember what it stands for, but thanks. But it's the postbac program at Cal State East Bay. And so while I was there, I moved back home, like I mentioned, to save some money. And I was just taking classes. And my only goal was to improve my GPA. I already knew my extracurriculars were solid. I already knew that everything else in my app was good, right? My extracurriculars, my shadowing, my volunteering, everything was solid. My GPA sucked. And so I did PHEP. I took 31 units over a year. I had a 4.0 across those 4 units because it was the only thing I was focusing on. I wasn't, you know, I mean, I was working full time as a tutor, and I eventually was hired by the school to be a tutor as well. But tutoring is now like a 9 to 5 sort of job. So I had more time to work on myself. I did an independent studies symposium again, where I took some research I did in undergrad, continued it during my postbac program, presented the first symposium, actually won an award for it, best in biochem, and also best overall in the whole symposium. But they couldn't give 2 awards. So they just gave me the biochem one and gave someone else the best overall because they didn't want to double dip. What a shame. I kept doing pre-dental events, but I wasn't shadowing as intensely. Like I mentioned, I was hired as a peer tutor for both parasitology and epidemiology, which are 2 classes that I really excelled in when I was in the postbac program. I ended up getting a committee letter, which is different than a letter of rec, because a letter of rec is a single letter. A committee letter, it's you collect a bunch of letters. A committee like looks them over and creates a summary letter, and then they also interview you, and that's what they create the summary letter of. So it's considered much more significant than a single letter of rec. And I took my DAT while I was in the postbac. The DAT, again, is like the dental equivalent of the MCAT. It was tough. And I think one of the toughest parts of it was that in order to get to Cal State East Bay in Hayward or Concord, depending on the campus, I had to commute 2 to 3 hours a day, like anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half one way, and then back, because I live in San Francisco, so it's a pain. But really what I learned from this is like the way I got a 4.0 after getting 3.2s my whole life is this right here. Like, don't work hard, work smart. Like anyone can sit in front of a book and just memorize for hours, but that's not efficient. Find what works for you and figure out how to make information stick. For me, it was studying with other people, really drawing things out. And if I can discuss a topic, I know it enough to ace the test on it. And that's for me. Everyone has their own thing. So now getting into dental school. Getting into dental school, just like getting into any health professions program, has a lot of different factors to it. There's your GPA, there's your standardized test. In my case, it was the DAT. There's your extracurriculars, and there's your personal statement. There's no formula to this. There's no guarantee you'll get in. In fact, I think one of the reasons there's such not a stigma, but like such a stereotype around health professions and about how hard it is to get in and needing like a perfect score. One of the reasons is because there's so many people with, a 4.0 GPA and like a 25 DAT, which is like 99.8th percentile. There's so many stories of people with those scores not getting in. Just like with medical school, there's so many people like a 530 and like a 38 not getting in, or 528. I don't know the limit. I think it's 528 is the limit from MCAT. But there's so many stories of these kinds of people not getting in, and what people don't realize is that it's a holistic process, right? It's not just about your stats, it's about who you are as a person. Because when schools accept you, it's not just a risk of will you pass your classes, will you graduate? Because of course, you know, if you keep failing everything and you don't graduate, that reflects poorly on the school, and the school only wants the best and brightest for that reason. But it's also a factor of, will you get along with your classmates? How will you be as like a health professional? Like, will you be personable? Can you talk to people? And yeah, and so everything matters. Your personal statement's your way to make yourself stand out at the end of it. I'm going to break this down a little bit. So this is basically what I was talking about. Your GPA, it's your academic history. It's showing that you can actually handle what's coming up in the health profession school. I would say, at least for dental school, you want both your cumulative and your science GPA to be above a 3.0 to be considered competitive. I think the average applicant, no, not the average applicant, the average person who gets accepted is somewhere in like at the 3.6 range. Obviously, I was not. And keep in mind, averages are averages. If you have a school with an average of a 3.5 and 100 students, you could have 50 students with a 4.0, 50 students with a 3.0, and the average would still be a 3.5, which is why these numbers are so misleading. The standardized test, it's kind of your way to even the playing field, because everyone goes to different schools with different curves, different hardness levels. That's another way to make yourself stand out. Like, for example, like I mentioned, I did really, really poorly in Gen Chem and OChem. I killed it. Like I got like in the 98th percentile on those sections on the DAT, which showed that even though I had issues with these subjects before, I really corrected something in my studying and in my methods moving forward. And so it balanced out. It showed that I was a strong applicant now as opposed to before. Experience, it defines who you are professionally. I always say be well-rounded. You know, like if you're trying to get into dental school, you don't want to just shadow dentists, because that only shows that you know what a dentist does. There's no volunteerism there. You know, you don't know how to deal with patients. You don't know any other aspect of service, I guess. Like, really make sure you have a bit of everything. You know, get a bit of research if you can. Get a bit of non-dental or non-medical related volunteering if you can. You know, pursue your passions. That's really what will make you stand out more than anything else. You know, I have friends who are like sailboat instructors and they got into medical and dental school, and that's valid. You know, so many people in this field, they just have the same resume, and anything that'll make you stand out separate from that, even if it's not related to the field at all, it's a really, really good tool for you. And your personal statement, it's your only chance to differentiate yourself. And the reason I say it's the only time is the only option to differentiate yourself is because when admissions applications look, or when admissions officers look at your application, they're kind of just glancing through, making sure you hit the right check marks. You got all your prereqs, you got your stats, you got your numbers. But then your personal statement is what they have to read. And that's where your personality shines through. What your personal statement needs to do is make them want to continue talking to you. You know, like if you have a personal statement that's just the same as everyone else's, it goes straight in the trash. It really does, because they've read it a million times and there's nothing interesting about you. If you can make them read your personal statement and then go, this is someone I want to have a conversation with, that's how you get your interview. And when you get your interview, that's when you make them want to keep having conversations with you, right? Because if they want to keep talking to you, that means you're interesting enough, valid enough, and frankly, your grades and GPA or whatever, it doesn't matter anymore, because they want you in your school. They want you as part of their community, and they put their stamp of approval on you as a valid and interesting person. One last thing about the personal statement, it is not a disadvantage statement. This is really important to note, because so many people try to use their personal statement as like these are all the hardships I faced and this is why you should accept me and all this sort of stuff. There's a separate section for that. Your personal statement should not be a pity party. It should really be you defining yourself as a person, and again, making yourself interesting and standing out. Not that your hardships and anything doesn't matter in there, and not that you shouldn't include them. You absolutely should if they were formative. But too many people conflate a personal statement with just talking about how much they've overcome to get here. At least for dentistry, the personal statement, literally the prompt you get is why dentistry. It's not asking you, you know, how have you shown improvement? How have you done this? How have you, like, what have you overcome? It's asking why dentistry. And you have to show and showcase with your words why you want to be a dentist. Helping people, you could help people as a social worker. You could help people as like a legal case manager. You could help people as a construction worker or a plumber. Why dentistry specifically? So yeah, this is kind of like the summary of what I did for the non-dental folk. This won't mean too much in the DAT section, but these were my scores. I do not recommend doing what I did. I kind of binged for the DAT and just got really lucky with my score. So maybe ignore this section. Again, very specific. My overall GPA when I was applying after community college, Davis, and my postbac program, I had a 3.35 cumulative and a 3.25 science, which I would personally say is borderline of where you should feel comfortable applying. Like I said, the averages are in the 3.5, 3.6 range, but they're averages. Most, like I said earlier, 3.0 and above, you should feel okay applying. But 3.35, 3.25, that's kind of the low end of an average applicant, I would say. And so I felt okay applying. I applied to a bunch of schools. I'm actually going to just run through this real quick. Sorry, this is a possum. It's screaming. But the DAT sucks. These are the breakdowns for it. I don't want to take up too much time. I made this PowerPoint a little too long. So if you want to know anything about the DAT, first of all, these slides will be recorded and posted on YouTube eventually, but then also feel free to email me. I'm very, very happy to give study tips. I'm very happy to share my experience and point you towards good resources for it. These are also just in general good study tips for your classes moving forward if you're struggling. The DAT is all about how you study, about how you manage your time, and knowing yourself as a student. You know, like what works for some people might not work for you, and it's important to narrow down what's actually effective. Again, same thing, quick guide to the DAT sections, my experiences with them, and just tips and tricks on mastering each one. And finally, your personal statement. Here, one sec. Actually, I'm going to check the chat real quick because I realized I haven't been doing that, and it's not popping up for me. That's a bummer. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to finish this presentation and I'll take any questions that backed up and any other questions you guys have for me, because I'm fine staying past 6. I just want to make sure that everyone gets their concerns addressed. So your personal statement, everything has to tie back to your field. Like I was saying, like, you know, saying you just want to help people, that's all well and good, but why is your field the one that'll let you help people? Avoid cliches. You know, like, again, cliches are not memorable. Cliches do not make you stand out. They just make the person reading your application groan and throw it in the trash. And most importantly, and that's why it's the third point, don't compromise who you are. I always tell people, like, people are always nervous about interviews and people are always like, oh, like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I come off wrong? Don't worry about that. Because at the end of the day, like, the application, it's self-selecting. The school that you will get into is the school that matches you the best. Imagine faking your way through an interview and trying to say all the right things for a school, getting to the school and then realizing that the energy of the school doesn't match you, right? Imagine having to either fake that same personality for 4 years or letting it go and being yourself, and then you and the school both hate each other because it's false advertisement, right? It doesn't really matter what school you go to. You know, at the end of the day, you're still getting the same degree, you're still getting the same skills. And so you really have to pick the one that's best for you. And in my personal opinion, it always hashes out that people end up where they need to be, both to fit their personality, their studying styles, etc. Personal statement, again, like there's a certain number of characters. For the dental one in particular is 4,500. That includes spaces, so it's about 1.5 pages. It was really, really hard to narrow down everything I wanted to say to 4,500. For some people, it's going to be hard to make it that many. But you really want to try to utilize as much of the real estate as you can to get your message across. Do a ton of drafts. My first draft looked nothing like my final draft. I had it read by so many people. I had it torn apart several times. I restarted maybe 3 or 4 times. I was really happy with my final draft. I could actually put my stamp of approval on my final draft and say, this is who I am as a person, take it or leave it, which I know I couldn't have done when I started off. And that's where you want to be. You want to be at a point where you can put your stamp of approval on it and say you're happy with how you represented yourself. Because again, there's no point faking it. There's no point using cliches. You want it at a comfortable point where you could then have that conversation with your interviewer when they want to talk to you. And again, the important thing to remember is that when people are reading your application, when they're asking you for interviews and all this sort of stuff, it's just one person reading over your application. It's not a committee. The committee makes the final decision, sure, but in terms of getting the interview, there's like one faculty member who has to read through like 20 applications in a weekend. And then they go, this person gets an interview, this person doesn't, which is why I keep making this point of standing out if you can. Because again, that faculty member is going to read 20 applications in a weekend, and hundreds over several weekends. I think the average the average number of people applying to UCSF for their dental school alone every year is in the thousands, right? And only 90 of us got in. So that should give you an idea of the scale of this sort of project. Again, this is kind of a summary of what you should write for your personal statement. I'm really happy to give feedback, advice, read, tear apart, whatever you need. But I'm not going to spend too much time on here. It's just this slide. Go to the YouTube recording and look it over. Hate to be that guy. My professors do that all the time, where they're just like, oh, like look at this at your own pace. I'm not going to explain it to you, but I'm trying to watch out for time. And I know that this probably isn't relevant to a lot of people yet, but down the line it could be. The main takeaways here are: write whatever you want. Again, you're representing yourself. Point 2 is, again, to have them notice your personal statement over someone else's. And point 3 is to make sure it's cohesive. You don't want each paragraph talking about its own thing and not tying together at all. You want it to be a story all the way through. You want it to be a complete thought. It's only a page and a half. That's less than most of the essays you've ever written in college. So yeah. And letters of rec. This is, again, very dental specific. I keep getting notifications. I think there might be, my chat's not popping up. Let me see if I can tab out real quick. Does not seem to be wanting to work for me, which is fine. I got a couple slides left. I'm so sorry if I'm taking up too much time here. I will answer questions once we're done. So letters of rec for anything, for a job, for dental school, for medical school, for any sort of application. Make sure that it's a good letter, right? You don't want a letter from the head of your science department if they barely know you and will write a poor letter. Make sure it's strong. Make sure to ask before they write it if they can write you a strong letter. If they can't, go to someone else. For dental school, you need one general dentist, usually one to two science professors, and one miscellaneous. I always say the more spread out, the better. For me, I had one dentist, two science professors, and another dentist who was actually my boss at the clinic I worked at. So it was more of a volunteering letter, focusing on that rather than dental stuff. And make sure you ask way ahead of time. Like most of my letter writers, I had to bug them like 3, 4, 5 times over the course of 6 months to get the letters in on time. And nothing feels worse than having your whole app complete and not being able to submit it because your letter writers are the ones lagging behind. This is what it looked like for me to apply, This is what it looked like for me to apply. I applied to 14 schools. Schools, it's like the application, and then there's secondary applications, which most schools will have. For most schools, the secondary application is just like pay us an extra $100 or whatever, and we'll call that your secondary app, which I think is dumb, but it's the system, you have to do it. I had 6 actual secondaries, meaning I had to fill things out beyond the general app. For dental schools, the general app works just like the college general app, where it's like you fill out one application and send it to any schools you want. Secondaries are for each school to send you their own individual questions. UCSF is one of the schools that has individual questions to help round you out. I ended up, out of the 14 schools I applied to, I actually ended up getting 8 interview offers and 5 acceptances. This number has actually changed since I made this PowerPoint slide. I'm sad I didn't change it. It actually ended up being 9 interview offers and 5 acceptances. I waitlisted on 4 of them, and I got accepted to 3 of them, meaning that I got into one school right away, waitlisted to 3, and got accepted to the other 3. How did I select schools to apply to? It was based almost purely on what prereqs I had done and what prereqs they required, where they were located. Like I knew I was not going to be going to Georgia or Tennessee. No offense to Georgia or Tennessee, but I did not think that I would want to spend 4 years in those environments. A lot of these schools are in urban areas. A lot of these schools are some schools are suburban. Some schools are, like very rural. That matters a lot because, again, you're going to be spending 4 years there. And no matter how strong your sense of will, an environment that you spend 4 years in will change you. So that matters a lot. Apply to places where you want to spend time. Apply to places where you wouldn't mind sticking around longer than your time in school. Apply to places where you think, the politics, the culture, everything about it suits you, and you won't just hate your time there. Because honestly, professional school, it's hard enough without you also disliking the area you're in. Of course, honestly, I'm not sure why this isn't first. Price matters so much. These schools vary wildly in how much they cost, and you want to come out of school with as little debt as possible, which is just, math. And finally, curriculum. Most schools teach more or less the same way. Some schools teach differently. There are some schools that use this thing called PBL, problem-based learning, which is where you kind of basically teach yourself. Like, you're in groups and you have scenarios and you have to figure out what's wrong. And I knew that I didn't want to do something like that. I wanted hands-on help from professors. I wanted to be directly taught this information. I didn't want to feel like I was teaching myself, which, given Zoom, I kind of am, but, aren't we all? This was also all pre-COVID, so I didn't even think about things like, what's their online schooling situation? How often are they allowed in clinics? How often do they do this? None of that was a consideration. And at the bottom is just an example of I made an Excel sheet with everything I needed, and this is an example of my UCSF line in it. It's green because I got in, and it basically has all of the dates and all of the funds and fees and everything I needed to do in order to apply, and that kept me on track since I had 14 schools to juggle. So I had the date applied, date verified, whether or not it had a secondary, when it's due, what the fee was, when I completed all of that, whether I got an interview, all this sort of stuff. And yeah, that about sums it up. I'm sorry I talked so long. I had to glaze through a lot of things, but I really wanted to get to your guys' questions. So you can find me here, Roger Krupetsky at ucsf.edu. It's my school email, but I don't see it disappearing anytime soon since I'm here for at least 4 years. And yeah, I'm just going to stop screen sharing and start looking at questions. Hopefully it'll pop up for me.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Roger, for sharing your time with us, excuse me, and sharing your experiences. I managed to hold on to a number of the questions throughout the presentation, so I can kind of fire them off one by one in order of appearance, and then give our folks some time to take some of the more recent information and ask some questions there. But conveniently, with the personal statements, the PIQ deadline for UCs actually got extended to this Friday. So might be relatively pertinent to kind of bring up some of those questions for any of the students out there. But okay. The first question that we had, yeah, go ahead.
Remind me what PIQ is. it's
personal insight questions.
Personal insight questions?
Yeah, so more tailor-made personal statements to prompts.
Okay. Well, give me something. I'll go off and give the best advice I can.
Cool. So the first question that actually came up was relating to kind of dentistry work and kind of general. How do you imagine dentist offices are like now during this time of COVID?
So things have changed a lot, but at the same time, they haven't changed that much, which I know is a little contradictory, but you have to keep in mind that, dental offices have always been highly sterile environments, lots of aerosols flying around, all this sort of stuff. The biggest difference that's hit dental offices is kind of the same one that has hit everything else, which is just capacity of how much we can do and how many people we can have inside. When I go to my personal dentist now, of course, everyone's wearing a gown, everyone's wearing face shields now, as well as N95 masks, whereas before you could just use a regular surgical mask. I think it was a little rocky at first, because I don't know if you've ever seen the chart, but I think the New York Times put out a chart that was the risk of acquiring COVID to the profession you're in, and dentists were at the highest end of the chart because we're literally in people's mouths dealing with oral aerosols every single day for 8 hours a day with things flying around blood, spit, it's bad. But in terms of business, people still have to get their teeth worked on. Life still goes on. We're still a necessary and mandatory health profession. I think people just have to be a little more creative and a little more patient with getting the same, I guess, financial results or as they would before. You can't just be seeing 8 patients at once in 3 or 4 different chairs in a full waiting room anymore, right? You have to be really on top of it with your time management. You have to make sure that, you sanitize everything. But I think because dental offices have always kind of been at this level, it's not as much of a jump as compared to like a hairdresser who now suddenly has to learn all those new sanitation requirements, and maintain it even further. Yeah, hope that answers your question, whoever that was.
All right, moving on to the next one. Was there any particular extracurricular that you did that schools and interviewers were most impressed with when you were going through the application process?
So, it's funny. In all my interviews, I don't really think I was asked about my application extracurriculars too much. If anything, I brought them up. Interviews happen in one of two forms. It's either a closed interview or an open interview. Closed file or open file. An open file interview is one where the person interviewing you has access to your application. They know all your scores, they know all your grades, they know all your extracurriculars, they know every single word you wrote, and they could ask you anything off of your application and you need to be able to talk about it. Closed file interviews are the opposite, where the person interviewing you has nothing about you besides your name. Even then, sometimes they don't even have your name. Like they get your name that morning, like, oh, like I'm interviewing Roger today, right? And you need to know what kind of interview each school is, because if it's a closed file interview, the interviewer only gets to find out what you tell them, right? And so that was a really good opportunity for me to bring like every question I answered, I brought in how my resume supported it. Things like my really, really bad grades at the beginning of college, I only talked about it if it was relevant. Like if I needed an example of overcoming hardship or showing how, like a common question is like, what makes you think you're ready for dental school? And I would go, well, look, like unlike all these geniuses around you that, had 4.0s their whole lives and just knew how to study, I actually had to learn how to do this. Like, it's not like, it's not like I was born with this. I actually had to work for it. And that shows a different level of commitment, engagement, and maturity than someone who, went straight to undergrad 4-year when they were 17, 18, graduated at 21 with an okay GPA, and now wants to go to professional school. I think that's actually another good point that I want to transition. I don't know if anyone asked anything on this, but as a slightly older applicant, like I'm 25 now, I was 25 when I got in, I was 24 when I was applying. I differentiated from the standard applicant who's like 21, 22 in that format where I had more life experience. I had the post-bac under my belt. I had worked my way through college, which again is different in terms of personal development. So yeah, I know that's a bit of a tangent off of the extracurricular question, but there wasn't anything on my app that was very specifically asked about. I think sometimes they'll ask about like volunteering, like what have you done, or like how have you reached out to the community, and that's where those extracurriculars really come in handy.
Got it. Thanks for that. The next question actually pertains to your experience back at UC Davis and the tutoring inmates. Was it done through a specific or certain program?
Yeah, so Tutors for Inmates is actually its own program. It was a club. I was a tutor for inmates, but it was like a whole organization, and they focused first and foremost on tutoring inmates, but they're also very much an advocacy group. So actually, when I was in Tutors for Inmates, I really only got to tutor or help with tutoring once because there's just so much bureaucracy that goes around it. Like you need to get your brown card, which is basically just like a background check and all this stuff that means you're allowed to go to the prison to tutor people, because they don't let just anyone in, right? Like you need to have like all these checks done. So it's difficult, but it was also an advocacy organization. We did a lot of Q&As. We had speakers on. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie 13th. It's on Netflix. Just really, really good system, or really, really good movie about I think it was 13th. Don't quote me on the name. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, but 13, like a really, really good, it's in the chat. Really good movie about the prison industrial complex. And actually the director of that movie came to talk to us on like a random Monday and do like a Q&A about it. And that was really cool. So yeah, it was through an organization.
Okay, cool. Let's see. The next question that we had was, how would you recommend future pre-med students to study for the DAT and those who are planning to become a dentist?
So it depends. I'll assume that you're like in community college, so you're still a ways out. First and foremost, don't rush it. Make time for it. Don't try to juggle it with taking classes because it really is a full-time job. Right now, there's a really good resource out there called DAT Bootcamp, which has kind of become the new standard for studying for this thing. Basically, some guy about like 7 or 8 years ago, his name was Ari, I think. Yeah. He graduated from Columbia a couple of years ago, but he did really, really well on the DAT. He got like we'll call like 99.8th percentile, like really, really well. And he created a program called DAT Bootcamp. And now it's this huge thing. Like every dental student or every pre-dental student uses it to study for the DAT. Like it's really, really good. The only caveat I'll say is that it does cost money. I think it's something like $500 for like 3 months of access. And the DAT itself costs like $500. So it's one of those things where it's like, you really want to make sure you get the most of it. And they provide you the schedule, which is, they say like, if you follow this 10-week schedule, you're guaranteed to get a good score. I can speak both from personal experience and from the experiences of like literally dozens of students I've talked to. That is not the case. That schedule is a guideline and you don't need to follow it. I actually know someone who followed the schedule to a T and got like just an absolutely awful score. And I feel really bad. Like he probably could have done better on the test if he didn't even use bootcamp at all, like wasted his money. For me, I took that schedule, I took their resources, which was really what matters the most. And that was really the brunt of everything I did. Like they had really great tests, they had great question banks, they had great explanations and videos on every single topic that's on the test. And I just learned that way. If you want to know more, I'd be really happy to reach out to you. Just email me and I'll send you a list of resources, because like studying for the DAT is a beast. You know, there's so much I can say on it and I don't want to take up like 10 minutes right now.
Okay. So the next question that we had coming in was in particular to the application process, and do your tips for dental school apps also apply to college apps? Or do you feel like it's just an entirely different game plan in terms of what and how to write those personal statements in the prompts?
See, that's kind of tough because I feel like when I was transferring, I didn't know all of this. Like I feel like my knowledge of applications and all this really only came when I started applying to dental school, because when I was transferring, I was just doing what everyone else around me was doing. I think if you're nervous about it, I would definitely look into the I Get C transfer program, like TAG, I think, because that gives you a guaranteed transfer it gives you a guaranteed transfer to pretty much a UC of your choice, besides I think LA, San Diego, and Berkeley. All the others are fair game. It gives you a guaranteed transfer as long as you meet the prereqs and meet the requirements. So I would very highly recommend looking at that. Personal statements, again, can't comment on it because I barely put work into mine. And, you know, I don't know how much that affected me, but like, you know, my personal statement transferring from Skyline to Davis, I did like 2 drafts and it read like a disadvantage statement, which is, you know, something I learned not to do when I was applying for dental schools. So I wouldn't do that. I think a lot of the tips probably stick. But I also know that getting into an undergrad school is I wouldn't say much more competitive, but it's different, right? Like getting into a professional school, getting into med dental school, everyone's applying for the same job, essentially. Doing undergrad, it's different. And I don't really want to comment on that because I'd lead you astray, probably.
Okay. Cool. So the next question that we had is, in terms of the application process, again, it states, what do we need to work on to make ourselves interesting from now to stand out as an applicant in the future, but maybe tailor fitted to kind of you, and kind of doubling back on some of the things that you spoke about during your presentation. Again, like what did you focus on to kind of make yourself stand out as an applicant in your process?
Right. So I think there's a few different schools of thought. First of all, breadth over depth. You absolutely want to do a lot of things, not like overload yourself, but show that you have interests. You know, a lot of people will like just scribe for like a hospital, or they'll just shadow, and that's really limited. Like you can have 1,000 hours shadowing and that means nothing because it means you had one experience. Like great, you know, you want to be a dentist. What else? What makes you stand out from the other applicant? I keep using the word interesting, and maybe that's a little misleading because it's not like you have to like, you know, start a rock band and tour the world. Although I know someone who did that. One of my classmates at UC Davis, he was literally a former rock star. Like I looked him up and I was like, oh, like you've toured with my favorite bands. And he switched careers and decided to go to med school. And so he has that story. None of us do, or at least I don't think any of us do. So when I say interesting, I don't mean like you have to like have something super cool. You just need something that gives you a personality, like makes you not just like a pre-med, pre-dental machine, but shows that you have other things going for you. Like for me, like, I mean, sure, I did tutoring for inmates and like I did the clinic and all this sort of stuff. That's all kind of resume builders. I also really like pottery. I did like the AIDS walk and volunteered for fundraising for years. Oh God, what else did I do? Like, I mean, I did some research with Dr. Cap, and so that was a varied thing. Basically, like I had a really well-rounded app, and so anything they wanted to talk to me about, I probably could talk about. I'm sure that anything you have in your personal life, like if you do something besides school and work that you're passionate about, that's sufficient. But that being said, I know I said breadth over depth and, you know, all this sort of stuff. Also, don't do like a bunch of crumbs, you know, don't do like a million things for 1 month at a time. You do want some things you're committed to. You want to showcase that, you know, you're not just super flimsy and floppy, you have things you care about. Now, whether those things have to be like, again, directly medical dental related, not necessarily, you know, like I have tons of classmates who have just been like volunteering with their church for like 7 years, and that's fine too, you know, and that's kind of what you have to do. You have to get a little creative with it. You know, just because it's with your church doesn't mean that it's not volunteering, right? Just because maybe you don't see it as a resume builder, that doesn't mean that it's not something you've been doing. It's still a statement of character, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then there's a nice follow-up question to that asked by another student. Again, talking about kind of making yourself stand out as an applicant, but, you know, in terms of like getting that breadth, is there a resource that you use to kind of help find these opportunities, or was it just a pinball machine and kind of, I came across this?
This one's kind of twofold. It's a little pinball-y, but God, where do I start with this? Okay, Facebook is actually surprisingly a great resource. Like if whatever school you're in, whatever class you're in, find like all the various Facebook pages of the clubs you're interested in. Find the Facebook pages of like your health professions advising team. Find the Facebook pages of like your classmates. And from there, you'll find a lot of opportunities because people are posting all the time. Like, oh, like I have a shadowing opportunity available. I have a job opportunity available. Like, oh, come join this club. Come do this. Come do this. Like that pops up on social media all the time. And I'm the kind of person who I really hate social media. Like I don't like it. I don't like what it stands for. But I have accepted that it's just a part of modern life. That is modern networking. So Facebook is a great resource, but beyond Facebook, I mean, networking. Like everyone you meet is a potential resource. Everyone you have a good relationship with is someone who could potentially reach out to you. I mentioned earlier that there's my classmate Brenda, who's a dental hygienist who worked with me on that research I did with Dr. Cap. Literally 2 years down the line, she texts me going like, hey, I'm trying to do a survey of like blah, blah, blah. Can you help me out? And I did. And then like from that conversation, she was like, oh, like, where are you at? And I'm like, oh, I'm still at Davis. I'm trying to apply to dental schools in about a year. And she goes, oh, like, I'm actually starting this, like, I'm like helping start this dental clinic in Mountain View. And like, we're looking for volunteers. Like, would you be interested in doing this? And I was like, you know what? No, I can't. Like, I'm in Davis, not in Mountain View. Like, there's no way I can make that commute. But if I was in San Francisco at the time, I absolutely would have taken her up on the offer. And I guess like that's how a lot of these connections happen. That's how a lot of these opportunities happen. You know, join your local, or not local, but like join whatever pre-dental club is near you. Keep your eyes and ears open and don't be afraid of saying yes because it seems hard. I think a lot of these things, they sound really official and they sound like these full-on jobs, but you quickly realize that, you know, they're extracurriculars. Like they take time, but it's not a career, right? Like you can absolutely dabble in a lot of things until you find something you're really passionate about and then stick with that.
Cool. Awesome. Some great advice there. Like actually accepting the fact that social media is a nice tool to use for networking. Absolutely. We had another question kind of come in fairly recently. This is more talking about kind of doubling back to, you know, when you were answering a question about kind of what separated you as a student, that you were a little bit on the older side. Just out of curiosity, a student asked, what is the age of the oldest student in your class?
I don't know. That's a topic of discussion for us within the class as well, because we're not super sure. Usually, like here, let me give you some numbers. So I think usually the average age of a dental class is like 24 when they're starting, 23, 24, because people, you know, graduate by 22, maybe take a year off or 2 years off, they apply. 24 is the average. I think this year our average is 25. And I know that that's not not that that's not normal, but I think we do lean a little heavier on the older side. I know a couple students who are like in their early 30s, but I don't know what the oldest is. That being said, I do have friends, like actually a really great friend of mine, she started dental school and she was 31. And I know that she has classmates who are like in their late 30s, early 40s doing complete career changes. So don't let that stop you. If anything, that's just like another feather in your cap. It's like that makes you interesting. Why are you, as someone in your like late 20s, mid 30s, whatever, why are you considering this career change? And why did you decide on dentistry versus whatever else you were doing before? You know, because this is like at 30, like this is a huge commitment. 4 years of your life and tons of money down the drain to change your careers to something. That means you've got something. And that something you've got is something that a 22-year-old fresh out of college cannot have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Doubling back to another question, what are some suggestions that you have for finding the right college, programs, internships that fit what you need in terms of your career?
Research, talk to people who go there, talk to people who have done those opportunities before. Don't come at it clinically. You know, don't come at it with just like a set number of questions, because odds are you won't get what you want out of it. Take your time, like really get to know the programs, do what you can. For me, you know, I'd interviewed at a lot of schools. Some of them I knew about, some of them I didn't beforehand. I still prowled their website. I contacted students who went there, and I just went, hey, what's this program like? Would you recommend it? Places like find your local medical or dental school. In my case, dental school was a UOP downtown San Francisco, and also UCSF, which is where I'm at now, constantly holding events like the clubs here. I'm actually sitting on the board of like 2 or 3 different clubs right now. Wow. I say or because it all meshes together. But point being, like every single club I do has outreach events. Like we have opportunities for you to, well, not during COVID, but like we had opportunities where like I showed up and I tried out the sim lab under the guidance of like some second and third year dental students. I had opportunities to come to conferences, which was just like, you know, 100 pre-dental students listening to students and speakers and faculty talk. There's a lot of resources out there for you to discover how schools operate and what programs are like. And I think especially during times of COVID, it's even more accessible because, you know, whereas before, if some school like Colorado University was doing something, there's no way I'd be able to go. But now, since everything has to be on Zoom anyway, well, why can't some kid from San Francisco show up in Colorado and go through the same experience?
True. Absolutely true. We did have another question come up, and maybe you can speak to it. Okay, if not, but the question comes in the form of what are the difference between in terms of the process steps and school years between med school and dental school?
I'm looking at it now in the chat. The difference of process steps, school years. So I don't know if this will answer your question, but I can give a general rundown of the differences between medical and dental school. So medical school is the one most people know. You know, you do your undergrad, you apply to medical school, which just like with dental school is a year-long process. You apply in like May or June or whatever, and you get in for the following year. Then you're in medical school for 4 years, and then you have to do a residency. And residency matches are no joke. You go wherever they put you. Residency matches are also very heavily based on your grades in medical school, where, you know, like everyone has to do a residency, but the difference of doing it, like derm residencies, if you want to be a dermatologist, good luck. That's like the hardest one to get because everyone wants it. So only the people with the best grades get it, right? Same goes for like surgery residents and all this other sort of stuff. You know, like it's very competitive. So you do 4 years of medical school, you do 4 years of residency, and then either you go work as a doctor or you can do like postdoc stuff. Like you can do more than one residency. Like for example, actually my primary care provider, I like him a lot, but he's an example of someone who he did his general practitioner residency and then he wanted to do a derm residency. And in order to get into the derm residency, after 8 years, after 4 years of med school, after 4 years of residency, he then worked in a derm clinic for like 3 years trying to like build up experience. And then eventually just said, no, this isn't worth it for another 4-year residency. I'm going to stay in primary care. So medical school, depending on what your final goals are, it can be a very, very, very long process. Especially because like as a 4 years of medical school and then as a resident, you're getting paid like $30K a year on like with all your loans and like you're getting worked like 16-hour days. It's a nightmare. Obviously, you can tell I'm a little biased towards dentistry for reasons. But dental school, on the other hand, it's 4 years of undergrad, and in almost every single case except for one, it's 4 years of postgraduate schooling. So it's the same thing, 4 and 4, 8 years total. There's only one school that does it different. It's UOP, downtown San Francisco. They have a 3-year program. It's accelerated. There are pros and cons to that. I'm happy to discuss them, but it's not really relevant to the question. So 4 and 4, and then as soon as you're out of dental school, you can practice. You're a dentist. That's it. You don't have to do a residency. That being said, a lot of people do. There are 1 and 2 year AGD or G something residencies, which are basically like you do another year of school essentially, but just practice. So like an AGD, or there's 2 kinds. One is like for a private practice sort of situation where you just basically stay in school another year, pay more money, and get more practice. And another one is like hospital rotation specifically. So you get a lot of varied experience. You get some endo experience, some perio, some oral maxillofacial experience. You get a lot of different experiences working at a hospital for a year or 2 as a resident, and then you can go be a dentist. On top of that, I'm sure we all know about orthodontists, periodontists, pediatricians, pediatric dentists. All of those are considered specialties. There's actually 9 dental specialties. And if you want to be a specialist, you do have to do a residency. And for these residencies, unlike medical school, you have to pay for them. Usually you have to pay for them. It depends on the specialty. So it is more debt, it is more time, you're losing out. But usually if you do a specialty, then of course you make a lot more money at the end, and then you get to do that one thing forever instead of having to deal with the ins and outs of general dentistry. So yeah, those are the main differences. Dentistry basically lets you get out into the field, pay off your debt, and start working sooner. But not everyone wants to be a general dentist. So at the end of the day, it could end up being that it still takes the same, 10, 12 years, depending on what you want.
And awesome. Thank you. We do have one last question here in the chat. What advice do you have on how to ask for and get a strong letter of recommendation?
So this is actually a really common question. Sorry, I'm going to take a sip of water real quick. Talk for an hour. This happens. So this is actually a really common question. And a lot of people kind of get it confused. And I was actually just talking to one of my mentees about it, where they were saying how, I don't have any professors that I can ask for a letter of rec from. And I asked them why. Like you haven't gone to office hours, like you don't know any of them personally, what's the problem? And they tell me, no, I do. Like there are several professors that like me and that I really like, and I'd love to ask them for a letter of rec, but I got like a B in their class. And that's like a no-go. And I think I wanted to hit him, getting a B does not make your letter bad. If anything, it makes it better because it shows that this professor knows you well enough and still vouches for you despite getting a B in the class. Oftentimes, and this is speaking from experience, the B student works so much harder than the A student, right? Not to discredit A students. Obviously, there's a ton of work that goes into it, and a lot of people work very, very hard to get it. But someone who really struggles in a class and has a lot of engagement with a professor, the professor will know them better. The professor will be able to speak to their cause better. And that's a really strong letter of rec, I asked Dr. Cap for a letter. Like I said, I got like a B+ and an A- in this class. It's not like by that guy's standards, by the guy I was talking about, I should never have asked him. I should have asked someone who I got an A in the class for. But I knew Dr. Cap. I worked with Dr. Cap. We had a great relationship. We had a really strong relationship even years after I left Skyline. We still kept in touch. And I knew that whatever letter he wrote me would be a good, strong letter. My grade doesn't have to be mentioned in the letter anywhere, does it? Why should he mention that? All he has to talk about is his experiences with me as a student. Your letters of rec, it's someone vouching for you, okay? So if it's someone vouching for you, just saying this guy got an A, that's not a vouch. That's a statement of fact, And so many professors get asked for letters of rec that they almost all of them will have a template of some kind, whether it's just insert name, here's the letter. And I don't know how admissions committees work, but UCSF gets a lot of applicants from Davis, for example. Let's say all the applicants get their letter from the same professor, and the professor just sends the same letter for every applicant. They'll catch on. They'll see that, as opposed to a professor who can give you a personalized letter, personalized attention, Oftentimes professors or people in general, I don't know, I keep saying professors, it's anyone you're asking a letter for, right? They'll ask you for like your CV. They'll ask to like go to lunch or sit down and have coffee and talk about yourself a little bit so they have material for it. And that's also why I was saying from the beginning, like when you ask someone for a letter of rec, make sure to, like, it's not taboo to ask, will it be a strong letter? Because you need a strong letter. I know people who have asked for letters from professors and the letter was mediocre or weak, or God forbid, I actually know one person who found out after the fact that the letter writer told the admissions committee to not accept her because of some beef or drama they had for whatever reason. And you don't want that. Like, go for the people that you have a strong relationship with, go for the people that you know will be able to vouch for you, and it'll turn out fine. It's a statement of character, you know? Because again, the school's taking a risk on you. The school needs you to fit into their class. They need to make sure that you have the mentality necessary to succeed. They need to make sure all of these things, and transcripts only say so much, right? Who knows how you got those grades? Who knows like how you did well on the test? No one. But you know what can be held to some level of scrutiny? The personal vouching of someone with their name on it, someone in a position of power over you.
Absolutely. Like you said, the application is a very holistic approach. Like, they're going to get how you performed in their class from the grades. They're not going to speak on that. So looking like we got to the end of the questions that showed up in the chat. I don't know if any of them were DM'd to you directly. I won't be able to see that, unfortunately. But in acknowledgement of the time as well, I'm just going to go ahead and end it here. And again, thank you so much for spending your evening with us and sharing your experience and guidance and wisdom with all of our students here for Science in Action. One thing that I really, really appreciated was a piece of advice where you talked about kind of being authentic and not trying to fake yourself in the interview or the application process, because again, you trap yourself into a 4-year hole potentially of continuing that charade. So really, really appreciate you kind of demystifying that fact and kind of dolling yourself up, particularly for any kind of program. So, we're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat. And congratulations getting into dental school. But for all of you participants that are still on the call, thank you so much for staying on with us and staying through the entire time. And for those of you guys that are watching on YouTube, we do post this onto our YouTube playlist, and we do host Science in Action every Tuesday, 4:30 to 5:30. We only have a few more left for the rest of the fall semester, so make sure to catch them at the corresponding Zoom link. Thank you again, Roger. Really, really appreciate it.